Africa, 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 yeah. Sendiko mama quality. Sendiko mama quality. Sendiko mama quality. Ariula baraganya Vincent Sorola Mbake wala ye wala malilila La Guinée, le Gabon, Sénégal, le Bénin, Yaoundé, oh quel beau pays. C'est qui comme ma quality. C'est qui comme ma quality. Masiba Mbane Gaza Masiba Mbane Gaza Masiba Mbane Gaza Masiba Mbane Gaza.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this SACA's professional forum, which is hosted by the Joburg and Pretoria regional committees. We've got a special guest presentation on POPIA and also on cybersecurity. I'm just gonna briefly give you the agenda for today. Between 4:30 to 14:45, 16:45, we're gonna do the welcome announcements. And then we're gonna have our special guest presenter, which is Euphodia Mathase. And then thereafter, we're gonna have our thank you from our Joburg director, which is Khabo. Thereafter, we're gonna start with our panel discussion on the POPIA compliance, and then we're gonna conclude the session for today, and Khabo is gonna be doing the concluding session for today. Okay, some housekeeping rules during this webinar. Please make sure that your microphone is muted at all times and your camera is switched off. And due to this being a POPIA presentation, please ensure that all questions are directed are actually texted in the chat box, which will be directed to our panel, whereby the moderator will actually take your questions. And then the session will be recorded and available on YouTube for viewing afterwards for those who join us a bit later. And then during the session, you can raise your hands if you've got any questions, or if you need any assistance, you can actually direct your questions, or you can send a direct message to the ISACA SA chapter office. And then in terms of your CPD hours, they'll be sent to you after 3 to 5 working days. And in the event that you have not received them, you can send an email to info info@isaka.org.za. Then in terms of the ISACA news and updates, firstly, congratulations to all the ISACA members. I mean to the members of the ISACA SA chapter. We have actually been recognized by the professional. We've actually been recognized as a professional body in terms of our designations by SACWA. I think this is actually a good thing for us, which we've actually managed to achieve. So meaning our designations now are officially recognized by SACWA. Okay, or in terms of applying for designations, you can send through your applications. You can send us an email at sakwa.org.isaka.org.za. You can apply for designations today, which is your ISAP SA qualification designation and your ISSM SA designation, which can be sent through. And then in the event that you still need any training, we've got a CISA exam review workshop, which is conducted at ISACA, which is done in-house. We've got our trainer, our expert trainer being Zulfikar Ali, on the 7th, 14th, 21, and also the 28th of August 2021. It's between 9 and 1 o'clock every Saturday. And then in terms of prices for that, it's about 1125 for members, and non-members would be 1250. In terms of, if you've got more questions, you can send through an email at isaka.org.za. At info@isaka.org.za. And then in terms of other events that we're going to be hosting at ISACA, we've got our hybrid annual conference, which is taking place next year. Please save the dates. The dates would be an in-person conference would be on the 22nd and also the 23rd of August 2020 and 2022 at Emperor's Palace in Johannesburg. And then the virtual conference will also be taking place on the same day. So this will be it will be a hybrid conference which we're going to be hosting next year. We're hoping that you're going to come and join us. And then for more information, you can contact info@isaka.org.za, and also you can take up the advantage for early registration of the conference. So please make sure you contact our office to get more details with regards to that and to get our discount packages. Okay. Okay, I've already told you about that. And then also, if you want to be a sponsor of the event, again, you can also contact our offices. We've got various sponsorship packages. We start from as little as 4,000 rands. And again, we're also calling for speakers. If you would like to be a speaker for our conference next year, please act now and contact our office by the 30th of November 2021. Again, please send us an email on info@isaka.org.za. There you've got our contact details, our telephone number, our website address, and then our office hours between 9 and 3 p.m. on weekdays, excluding public holidays, and also you've got our office addresses. So if you've got any questions with regards to what I've told you about, please contact our office. We'll gladly assist you with regards to that. Okay. Then I'm going to introduce our first speaker for today, which is Ms. Euphodia Mathase. She's got a CISA qualification, a SISM qualification, a Seagate, CIRISC, a CIA, has security. She's also a lead security manager and has over 10 years experience in both external and also in the internal auditing. She has been involved in both assurance and also consulting assignments in both private and also the public sector. So ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Euphodia to come and talk to you.
Thank you, Dr. Kem. I'm just gonna get myself into screen. Hi, everyone. Can everyone see my screen? Am I able to see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
All right, thank you. As Dr. Cameron has introduced me, I'm Euphodia Mathase. Today, I'll be talking to you about cybersecurity and cybersecurity acts, the new acts, as well as the POPIA Act. I'll be covering the role of the two acts. Who are the role players in POPIA? What types of cyber crimes are covered in the Cybercrime Acts, and how do those link up to POPIA? I'll also be covering business obligations, what companies are required to do, to have in place, and failure to do so, what will be the fines and penalties. I'll also touch some points on how we can assist our stakeholders in ensuring that they comply with POPIA, as well as some highlights on gaps, on how we could highlight gaps to our stakeholders in areas where they still lack, or where they need to cover. They need to sort of cover the risk that they're exposed to. Firstly, looking at the role of the Act itself, the Cybersecurity Act. Basically, the Act is aimed at protecting us, everyone from criminals, as well as really just to prevent to prevent cyber crimes, and also to improve security in our country in general, but not only just for companies, but also as a state. We also needed to be in par with other countries. While on that, in the POPIA, there's a question of who is affected by this act, or who should look out for the act. Basically, anyone who uses the internet, including companies and individuals, companies including financial institutions like insurance companies, banks, as well as your electronic communication service providers. That will be your Telkom, your Vodacoms, your MTNs. So just also looking at the role of POPIA. So POPIA aims to promote the rights to privacy. So you as an individual, you've got rights to your own to privacy of your own information, and how that information then flows, and to protect the information when it flows, as well as the right to access to the information. In a nutshell, in POPIA, there's literally it involves three role players, which is the owner of the data, which is me and you normally. The organizations that are then involved in processing the information, whether it's your insurance company, is your bank, or any company that will then deal with personal information to do their day-to-day business, as well as the third party being the operator. The operator is normally it's not normally the collector of information, but an organization that will process the information on behalf. If it's in the case of an insurance, your insurer might probably outsource a division that does claim on your behalf. So that company also processes the information, but they are not really the responsible party. So it's the role of the responsible party to ensure that the operator is also in compliant, but it doesn't shift their responsibility in the data. So their responsibility still remains with the responsible party to ensure that that data is handled with care. I will then talk to the types of cyber crimes that are covered in the Act. So that talks to unlawful access to information. So that could be just any business data, including personal information. So if I could make an example, it will be hacking would be part of unlawfully accessing information. The second one being intercepting data illegally. So it can be probably viewing or buying the data or just capturing it, or probably just using tools to capture and get that data that unlawfully. So that's also covered by the Act. Having access to tools, hardware and software that may be used to commit cyber crimes. If you are in possession of such, it's also one of a crime that is covered by the Act, as well as interference with data and system. It also covers cyber fraud, which is fraud that is committed using computer programs, as well as forgery, cyber utterance. So the difference between the two, forgery and utterance, is when you create false, the forgery will be then creating false data, but uttering will be then the passing of that information. Also, malicious communication. We probably are exposed to this one in our daily lives. Malicious communication is when someone sends a message, probably to incite violence, or sending a message that might cause harm, and then that message being circulated around. We have probably seen that a lot of that happening in the past few weeks. So that is regarded as a crime, and it is an offense. So how those crimes that I've counted, they might involve personal information, and that's where POPIA then comes in, when if it's, for example, unlawful access to data, that data might just as well be someone's personal data. Then the other part of the Act is then evoked. So the two Acts work hand in hand, and the aim of the two Acts together, they sort of strengthen the security in our country. Hence, there's a need for them to be used together, but not to be seen as one piece standing alone of legislation, but together as a whole, as a package in terms when it comes to security standard. And that's how it should also be viewed in our companies and organization, and how as we consume the data ourselves as an individual. So the next part I will then cover what are the business obligations. So for electronic communication service providers and financial institutions such as the banks and insurance, they are to report to the police with not later than 72 hours of crime occurring. They have to also sort of preserve evidence for the crime that has occurred. Also, if the information that has been that was hacked or the cybercrime that has occurred, if the information includes personal information, then they are to report the matter they are to notify the data subject, that is their customer. So for example, in South Africa, I think a year or two ago, we had an incident where there was a data breach with one of the insurance companies, and recently even one of the banks, and they sent messages to the affected people to notify them that their data have been hacked or their information was stolen, and they would probably say what they are doing about it, and then provide information. So they are also to notify the data subjects as well as the regulator, the information regulator. So this is also just another example that shows that the two acts they sort of work hand in hand. So also, just in addition, when it comes to obligation, any business that falls falls victim of cybercrime, they are also supposed to preserve the evidence and also cooperate with law enforcement. The next slide, I will then sort of highlight the fines, that these fines are applicable to everyone, to any business. And then after here, then I will go through fines that would be applicable to specific organization and to individual. So if an organization fails to process data, including personal data in a lawful manner, they could be probably imprisoned. It could be fined or imprisoned for 5 years. If they have access to personal information, or if they have accessed or they are in possession of personal information which they have obtained in an unlawful manner, they could be imprisoned to up to 10 years or get a fine. And also having access to having or being in possession of software and hardware that can be used to commit cybercrime, there's also a penalty for that. There's a fine of 10,000. Sorry, there's a imprisonment term for 10 years. So for electronic communication service providers and financial institutions, cybercrime might not have occurred to them, but it might had happened, and it might have happened using a bank, for example, an account or a transaction going through, which was probably a cybercrime. If they become aware of that, they need to report it to the police and preserve the evidence. Failure to do so would result in a fine of 50,000. Really, probably looking at it in a company sense, that 50,000 might be not so much of a hefty fine, but for me, it's the reputation, the reputation, and probably the likelihood of losing customers by not actually practicing or being in compliance of such serious laws that might put their clients into trouble. They might run away. If it's an insurance company that is not reporting such activity, it's like, or a bank, it's likely that it would not attract new client, or even existing client might consider switching to other banks. For IT companies, if they were to be found that they are selling or they are developing tools that can be used to commit cybercrime, that will result in companies being shut down. So for them, it's not a fine that that one can just pay, but they would cease to operate. And then for me and you, if we then decide that, okay, also if we tweet, SMS, or send WhatsApp, passing harmful messages or messages that could probably cause harm to another person or to property, we could be imprisoned for 3 years. And if we are in possession of applications and tools, probably in our phones or in our PC, that could be used to commit cybercrime, we could be imprisoned for 10 years. And if we share our passwords, for example, if you were to share your banking details with someone who then access that, or you share your logins details and someone goes and commits a crime, you are also regarded as a criminal, and you could be imprisoned for 10 years for that offense. Or if you are somehow found in possession of password and information that the law enforcement suspect that you're going to use that to go commit cybercrime, you would then be charged. In this case, you are not innocent until proven guilty. You are guilty, and it's then in your own. The onus is on you to then prove your innocence. Okay, so here I've just listed some checkpoints which we can probably sort of see if our organizations have these things in place to ensure that they are in compliance with POPIA. But that doesn't mean once this checkpoints or checklist is ticked, everything is hokey-dokey, but it has to be taken into a bigger picture where we are looking at security standards of the organization in totality. But this might be areas where they probably need to go and change and amend. So whether they need to appoint an information officer and get that information officer registered with the regulator, make amendments and draft policy, privacy policies, as well as their privacy statements, raising of awareness with all employees, so provide the right trainings at a workplace and have the right policies. Also check whether the organizations have amended contracts with their operators to ensure that the operators are also in compliance with POPIA, because at the end of the day, the responsible party would still be is still accountable, even though the information is being processed outside the organization. Also, whether the organization has processes, policies and procedures on how to report data breaches to the regulator and also to the data subjects. This is just so that if an incident happened, the company is not found wanting, but they have prepared statements and who would be the right person in the organization to then address the media and how to then report. Also, if the organization, then if it has information that it sends outside our borders, also to make sure that the transfer of information is being transferred in a lawful manner. Including the sharing of information, also ensure whether the policies have been amended, because most organizations do have website privacy policies, but whether they are amended to and if they make consideration of this of the acts, as well as templates and forms I personally always make fun of the Z83 and the information that's questioned that one needs to complete. Companies need to look at all their forms, whether what they are requiring, is it over and above what they are collecting the information for, because you need to only collect the information that you need to use for a specific purpose, and to avoid over gathering of information. I'm sure earlier in July, when the month started, we saw a lot of emails and messages coming through from companies that normally send you marketing messages. Just for them to be compliant, they sent messages for people to consent if they could still receive this direct marketings that they sent. So this is just a high level, some of the checklists that we can sort of check whether our organizations are in compliance. So us ourselves as
Euphodia, you're muted. We can hear you.
Hi, Kim. I was unmuted and since when?
Now you can continue, just on the slide.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. All right. You gave me a fright today. Okay, so we need to sort of assist or participate in gap analysis to sort of identify where our organization have gaps when it comes to security standards as a whole, obviously in consideration of POPIA and the Cybercrime Act. Assist them in reviewing data management processes and procedures, as well as incident management processes, because then the 2 acts talks to data management. If they were to manage data properly, classify it, and provide access only only to those who needs it to do their daily jobs, and also the processes around incident management will then cover how they then deal with incidents of cyber crimes or loss of data and hacking and so forth. So in closing, I believe I've probably sort of touched a bit of my closing remarks while I was presenting. So in closing, I've got 2 points. One relates to that we shouldn't sort of view the 2 acts in isolation, but look at them as a part of tools that we can use to protect ourselves, our information, as well as the organizations that we work with. Yeah, so basically all these acts work together, but in a bigger scheme of things, including all our security standards that we need to have in our organization. Thank you. Any questions and answer? Yeah.
Thanks, Euphodia. I've got one question here on the chat from Patrick. It says, what is the organization's responsibility in terms of cyber fraud?
Okay.
You get it?
So, okay, so is he saying if a fraud is to occur in an organization, what is the organization supposed to do? How should they respond?
Yeah, it's more along those lines.
Okay.
In terms of what sort of action or something the organization can actually take with regards to any cyber fraud which happens within an organization, or what is their responsibility as an organization?
So if that it depends on what kind of an organization it is. So if a fraud has occurred in the organization, that will be different from when a fraud has occurred. For example, somebody went and defrauded my bank account, then it means then the bank would then probably pick that up and be aware of that fraud. So in that case, the organization's responsibility is to report that fraud, and also to preserve the evidence for in case if it's required for law enforcement. But if the organization was to be frauded, not an individual, but the organization itself, and maybe they lose data or some in the fraud, if they were to be frauded themselves, then they need to report that to, they also need to report that to law enforcement, reserve the information, preserve the evidence. And if it involves someone's information, people's data, then they need to report to the regulator, as well as the individuals that are impacted, the data subjects.
Okay, next question is from Jim Green. It says, how do professional pensioners protect themselves from falling victim to law for having hacking tools that could be used in a crime as well, but also used for legitimate testing? I think mainly talks to how do professional pen testers protect themselves from falling victims to the law for having hacking tools that could be used in crime, as well as but are used for legitimate testing.
So the law does not prevent us or stop us from having such. The most important thing is to be able to demonstrate and to explain yourself why you are using such tools. What it says is you need to prove that you are innocent, that how you are using the tools and the hardware, the software and the hardware tools that you have, to the law enforcement.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think we're done here. If there are no further questions, we can move on to the next session. Just wanted to remind you, in terms of, we've got a couple of quiz questions there, so please try to answer them correctly, and our winners will be announced at the end of the session, and then they'll get a prize probably tomorrow morning. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Khabo. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Euphodia.
Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Euphodia, and thanks, Dr. Kim. We have an exciting lineup coming up. We are going to be talking POPIA. As we know, it has come into law from the 1st of July, and therefore we need to know what's happening, what are our obligations, what are we responsible for, and we have with us a great panelist that Lynn would introduce. So Lynn is going to be our moderator. So Lynn Martin is an experienced management consultant with over 21 years of management consulting and IT audit experience across a broad range of industries. She began her career in 2000 at Arthur Andersen, and then spent a number of years leading the Clicks Group IT internal audit team, and then a further 6 years at KPMG. In 2012, she left KPMG as a director to start Mobius Consulting. She is extremely passionate about making a tangible and sustainable difference at both clients and within Mobius Group. Lynn's core focus and experience are in the information privacy and IT governance domains, having led significant projects at leading South African and international organizations. I'm going to hand over to Lynn, who will then introduce our panelists. And please, this is going to be an interactive session, so feel free to ask whatever questions you have, put your questions down in the chat. So that this can be an interactive session. We want to make sure that when you come out of this session, you are equipped with the knowledge to be able to handle this monster that faces us now. Not really a big, huge monster, but it is something new, and every day, obviously, things are changing as the industry. We're trying to understand what are requirements and what are our obligations as civilians as well as professionals. Lynn, I'm going to hand over to you and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bobo. That's, I think POPIA, the topic of the year, the topic of the month. I think to everyone that's joined us today, welcome to the POPIA panel discussion. Sure, we are now beyond the very, very, very long-awaited Protection of Personal Information Act compliance deadline. I hope you have all had a good transition from preparation through to compliance. I'm sure a lot of the discussion today will be a bit about that transition and what now. So I think we are definitely going to have a very interesting and hopefully a very engaging panel discussion today. While I introduce the panel members, I would just ask you to give some thought to any questions that you might have, at your organization, in your role. Give it some thoughts along so we can get some questions going in the chat. And then I'm going to just introduce our panel. They are, I think, very well known to most of you. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy their perspectives, their advice, and who knows, maybe a little bit of banter along the way. I would just like to ask my panel, as I introduce you, please switch on your video that we can see you. I think let's get going. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Peter Tobin. He has 40 years of business and management experience across a number of different industries and roles. Peter combines real-world expertise and experience with a solid grounding in global best practice and a clear understanding of how to achieve world-class performance, particularly in the area of Protection of Personal Information Act, as well as the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, which is better known as the EU GDPR. Gone are the days where we can look at our law in isolation. We need to have a local and a global perspective. Peter, I'm keen to hear your views this afternoon. Next, we have Peter Hill. Peter is really part of the ISACA family, and most of you, I'm sure, know him very well. Hi, Peter. Peter has many, many ISACA qualifications, one of them being the relatively new ISACA qualification that is most relevant to this to this discussion, the Certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer, known as CDPSI. So those of you that are not aware of it, go and have a look. If it's something that you're wanting to solidify your skills, solidify your experience, go and have a look at the qualification. Peter is known as a leader in data protection, privacy, and information security consulting and training. Peter has been involved in data protection since 2008, when he participated in the parliamentary discussions and made 6 submissions to the technical committee, drafting the POPIA Act between 2008 and 2012. What a journey, Peter. And here we are in 2021 at last. Next, I'd like to introduce Candice Jackson. Candice is a senior managing consultant at Mobius Consulting. Candice has a variety of ISACA qualifications. Adding to that, she also has the CPE EU qualification, which really gives you that global view for our local clients, that we really do have that combination. Candice's core areas of expertise include privacy as well as third-party risk management, and she has assisted many of her clients with practically implementing both these disciplines across industries. Candice is also a young mother who demonstrates how a woman in IT, in information security, in privacy, can really achieve a successful career and equally have a wonderful personal life, fulfilling personal life as a wife, mother, daughter. Thank you, Candice. And lastly, I'd like to introduce you to Vincent Labuschagne. Vincent is the Chief Operating Officer at Pétanque NXT. Vincent holds a BCom in accounting with various leading IT and commercial qualifications to make him a very well-rounded business executive. Vincent's experience originates in management consulting with a deep specialization in business operations. He has nearly 2 decades of operational experience, including over a decade in the C-suite and director level. Vincent's POPIA experience spans nearly a decade and covers dozens of small and medium businesses, as well as several multi-billion rand businesses. Sure, over a century of experience around the table today. So any questions that you might have, I'm quite confident that this team can answer. So yeah, really looking forward to it. While you are all busy with your questions and thinking about them, I'm going to give each panel member an opportunity to do a brief, quick opening statement. Vincent, could I ask you to kick us off?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, I think my view on POPIA and my interest in being part of this webinar today is around some of the practical aspects. So I think there's a lot of theoretical knowledge that consultants bring to the table, but how do we make that practical? So I'd love to get some questions out of the audience that we can give some practical insight and advice on what works in a business, rather than just the theories of what we should and shouldn't do. Lynn, you're on mute.
So sorry, I'll keep it on. Candice, would you like to follow up on Vincent's comments?
Yeah, I think the same sentiments as Vincent, really interested in this topic. I think I've been interested in it for a while. And really the practical side of it. You know, you go into organizations and you've got to see different size organizations, and you can't just take a one size fits all approach. And I think, you know, that's the part that thrills me. That's the part that I like to get entrenched into. So as much as the theory is there, as much as this is compliance, it is legislation that, you know, we have to comply with. But how do you practically do it? How do you continue business while still keeping the legislation at the back of your mind all the time? And I think, you know, that's sometimes where there is that boundary, and, you know, it stops people from thinking. And I think it's about working past those barriers. So I think that's what I'm really looking forward to in our discussions today.
Thanks, Candice. Yeah, I think we sometimes, when it's a law, we put the compliance hat on and we forget the business hat, and very much POPI makes us keep both hats on equally. So very much keen to hear your perspective on how do we ensure we are compliant, but at the same time, adding business value, doing this for the right reason. And I think, you know, that's at the heart of it is, you know, are we looking after our customers' data, our service providers' data, our employees' data? So yes, let's continue that. Peter Hill, would you like to add your opening statement?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's been a long wait, and with great excitement, the month kicked off, and we expected all sorts of things to happen, bells and whistles to go, and it doesn't really appear to be so. It seems that it's the same as it was last month and the month before. So I think for a lot of people, they might be thinking that this wasn't really such a big thing after all, and maybe it's been blown up by the consultants pushing an agenda. I'm certainly looking forward to hear what the regulator has to say. I know that there are a number of significant requests for assessments, complaints that have been lodged. And so we're looking forward to find out the regulator's take and the regulator's enforcement actions. POPIA is technical and complex. And I've looked in many different areas and found that most organizations are lacking by a long way from what is actually required. A recent area of interest is looking at web analytics. Many companies are using Google Analytics, which means they've got transporter flows of information, which is going to be problematic. Many companies are using digital marketing, and we know that in South Africa, POPIA requires consent before we actually have direct marketing. So there are many technical challenges that have not been addressed by most organizations. So I think we're at a very early stage of a very long journey. And it'd be interesting to see when the regulator starts driving this vehicle by introducing a few fines and giving some better direction to everybody that has got to this point.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think that's what we're all waiting with bated breath is when the rubber hits the road and the regulator starts being active in the market in terms of, you know, people have raised complaints and, you know, where we haven't got our house in order, where an audit, you know, is enforced on a business. And so we're all waiting a bit with bated breath as that wheel starts turning. But yeah, absolutely, very technical. Yeah, and most of today, I'm sure we're going to be going through what does it actually look like out there? How ready are we? And what is the emphasis at this stage? Lastly, Peter Tobin, would you like to give us the last just brief opening statement?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. I think what we've seen in the recent days is the regulator preparing the market for the balance, that balance between access and openness and protection. One of the things that didn't happen last year when the Act came into effect was the regulator taking over from the Human Rights Commission. That's now happened, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how the regulator steps up what is expected of organizations in terms of complying with POPIA at the same time as complying with the POPIA Act. So what's old is in fact maybe new. I think that the regulator is about to bring a new perspective. We've seen some additional draft regulations have been published on the POPIA side. So I think in this discussion, we need to keep that balance between POPI, which is seen as being something new, and POPIA, which quite frankly, I think many commercial organizations have been very little touched by. Most of the action has been taken by the investigative press, who've used POPIA to bring South African society to a much more open status. And I suspect that we'll see much more use of POPIA access and the new data subject rights which are coming about under POPI. So it's a question of balance, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. On that, I'm going to start kicking off with a couple of questions that I have in my little stack over here. And I see we have got some coming through on the chat as well. Peter, I'm going to start with you as we kick off the question section. My question to you is, were we ready? What is your view on the operational readiness of the businesses in South Africa? We had obviously lots of projects underway. Us as consultants, this was a wonderful time. Were we ready? Is what I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and it could be confusing. There are two Peters, so I'm assuming, Lynn, that's a follow-on yes, question. Yeah, look, I think that the challenge has not been to large commercial organizations who, in most cases, are already familiar with complying with new legislation. Those organizations that have in-house legal counsel are familiar with meeting legislative requirements in other areas, took this in their stride, they saw it coming from a long way off, and in general terms, certainly if you believe some of the surveys, which have been run by publications like IT Web and others over the last several years, there was a general sense of preparedness for the mature organization, the large organization. And I would extend that to a number of the public sector entities as well. It's a mistake to think just because government doesn't get it right everywhere, they get it wrong everywhere as well. Not the case. I think where the challenge has been is in the smaller entity, right down to the one-person operation. And the pressure has not been in worrying about the regulator. Over the last year or 18 months, the pressure has been building where members in the supply chain are pressurizing each other to ensure that they're protecting their own turf. I've had a number of my clients, very small organizations, who have been put under pressure by their customers who said, unless you can demonstrate compliance, and sometimes excessively so, asking for much more than an operator agreement would expect. Many small organizations are getting pressure to demonstrate full POPI compliance, seen from the perspective of their large customers. And that's really demanding. It's really tough. We've just seen in the previous presentation the wide range of actions which potentially can be taken by what could be a sole trader, one man, one woman operation. When you're a large organization that's used to doing this sort of thing from a legal compliance perspective, no question. Now, your direct question was, how ready were we, are we? I'd actually like to turn that around and say, how ready was the regulator? I went to the site this afternoon, to the regulator's site, and I read with interest, no mention whatsoever in the strategic plan as to what the regulator is doing to build up their capacity. There may be other people like me on this webinar who are frustrated in the lack of contact from the regulator. I've written to the regulator more than once raising concerns, and I'm not even getting an automated response saying, thank you, we'll get back to you. Not even that. And certainly no response to my inquiries. And I think what I'm seeing is the capacity issues the regulator is facing. In their last annual report, which is on their website, they confirmed that they had 31 employees. I think there are more vacancies than that on their website at the moment. You know, it's really a question of not so much the capacity of the marketplace. It's a question of what's the regulator doing to get their house in order. There are all sorts of things that I think every one of us on the panel here and others expected the regulator to produce by now. Where's the new POPIA manual template demonstrating that they've effectively taken over from the Human Rights Commission? Where are the 19 or whatever number of forms it is that were published in the regulations back in December 2018, which only sporadically have been produced on the regulator's website? Where's the list of adequate countries that, seen from a South African perspective, will facilitate international trade? The list goes on. Yeah. So my concern isn't so much about the readiness of the individuals, it's the readiness of the regulator to meet the demands of the market. Yeah. In particular, I'm concerned that the regulator may not even understand their own legislation. There was a statement issued just a few days ago suggesting that individuals should not be taking photographs of other individuals. And yet that demonstrates the regulator fails to distinguish between household activities in a personal capacity, and those undertaken by a responsible party. I think there's a mishmash of ideas out there. And the sooner the regulator gets their act together, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. What I'd like to, I'm going to follow on two threads that you've started there. The first one I'd like to direct to Candice. You mentioned, you know, we've got large corporates who've got big legal teams, compliance teams, you know, they've got separate legal teams to compliance, to risk. So they've got the capacity to really have had a program running, and some of them for over 10 years, they've had a program running to prepare. Versus having many smaller organizations, and Vincent, I think you may also have a perspective on this, lots of smaller organizations, you know, they maybe provide a very niche service to a very large corporate, they don't have a team of people. Candice, my question to you is, you know, in your intro, we spoke about you providing third-party risk management services. How would you know, what have you seen in terms of the practicality of a smaller business or a medium-sized business? How do they provide privacy protection at an appropriate level? What does that look like? How do you even start that transition from, I as a large corporate have, you know, I want these 100 controls and processes in place, to, for a small business, what are the essentials to ensure that we can do business?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Lynn. I think, you know, Peter, you raised some key points there. And I think just touching on the different elements or the different organization sizes, large, medium, small. And, you know, yes, agree with you that the larger organizations where there's a fully fledged legal department, they've sort of like driven how things need to happen. And they sort of leading the business into, these are the controls, put this in place. And like you mentioned, Lynn, they've been dealing with it for at least 10 years, or at least for the last 5 years, and put a fully fledged program together. Our smaller entities are the ones that, you know, needed to take a little bit of a step back and say, okay, fine, what is it that I actually need to do? And for me, when we went in and we started assisting clients, it was taking that step back and understanding, what is it that you deal with? Who are your data subjects? What are those types of information? And then start seeing, okay, fine, yes, these are the requirements. These are the things that you need to put in place. How do we make it tailor fit for you? So don't just go and, you know, buy this group of policies and you know, say, I'm going to use that and I'm going to put that out, because sometimes, and majority of the time, for smaller organizations, they don't really apply because it is looking at it from a very broad sense. So that's where we saw the difference with going in and helping organizations. It was taking stock of what they actually had in place. So understanding those personal information inventories and saying, okay, from that is all your touch points of information. And let's start putting the required controls in place related to those touch points of personal information, while still dealing with all of the requirements. In the previous discussion, there was that checklist. It's exactly looking at that checklist and making sure, okay, yes, those are the items that I need to put in place, but it's not going to be the broad sense of how it is within a financial institution or these big banks, compared to a very niche market where I'm sort of a one-man show, but I still need to comply with the regulation. So it really is saying, this is what it is. This is what I do with the information. These are my data subjects. And this is what I'm going to make sure that I put in place to still have a business at the end of the day while complying with, you know, with the act. I think for me, the biggest change that I've seen from last year to this year is that people did take it seriously. I think a year ago, people still may have asked that question, well, is it going to come? And then COVID hit and was like, okay, maybe it will be extended, because I think we saw that trend so many times with the regulator as well, that it kept on being extended, or, news was coming up. And, when it came 1 July, it was like, okay, yes, we didn't have this whole big hurrah, and it was like, okay, yeah, now it's good to go. And, we all systems go. But it's changed in terms of how people take it. I still see some large organizations still on the journey, still putting things in place, still making sure that they've, especially around the whole consent issue, still trying to make sure, am I doing it correctly? Do I have the systems to manage consent? So I still see some of those flaws in big organizations, so not only in the small ones. And then I think a large aspect for a lot of people is just the awareness that they've taken up. And making sure that the employees are aware that, yes, your personal information is also out there, but just also know when you're dealing with your operations that you need to be aware of this new legislation that is out there. So I think we've seen an uptake definitely in privacy services, and just getting their house in order. We did see some of the larger organizations also moving towards that audit of their privacy compliance journey, or the practices that they've put in place, and then making some updates and some tweaks. So I think everybody is still a little bit in this journey of still implementation. I can't say we're fully in a space of where we all monitoring and we all fully fledged. And I think we're still going to see that over the next few months. I think there's also the practical side of data subject rights, and as data subjects become more aware of their rights, you're going to start seeing more requests. And I don't think any request is just standard. And I think that's where, your core privacy teams, and it's not a one man, it's not a legal or an IT. It really is a team of people across the business that will have to come together to say, when a data subject wants to exercise his or her right, what does it deal with? How am I going to practically be able to respond to that? And I think that alone comes with so many different nuances. So yes, while you may have had a procedure or policy in place in the beginning, when it comes part to, practically responding, I think you're still going to be shown and thrown a few curveballs. So I think we're going to go through this journey still of implementation before we get into monitoring. Yes, some organizations are there. They automated, they're using systems to do things, which is really good to see. But I think there's a lot of people still on the journey, and I think they still will be on the journey for some time to come.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Candice. Peter Hill, I'd like to extend the conversation on your side. And really, Candice has touched on a few points around, the customer starting to interact with the business. Now that we are in a place of needing to be compliant, what is your take been on what are those volumes and the actual interaction that we've had from the customer, from the data subject? Have you seen, from your dealings, have there been a lot of customer requests and, a sudden volume that corporates are needing to deal with? Request, remove my consent. Have you seen that type of trend, or what are you seeing in the market on the practical side of things?
Thank you, Lynn. In terms of the clients that I've been assisting, a number of them did start getting a lot of emails, letters around the 1st of July, requesting consent or confirmation of various matters. Sadly, it shows how ill-prepared or ill-informed many people are. And so I don't have the optimism that most organizations are actually prepared. And I think many of the big organizations are not prepared. I can back that up by actually just looking at their POPIA manuals, looking at their privacy notices, looking at the use of cookies on websites. The information that's accessible publicly shows that all these large organizations are anywhere ready for this act, which means that the data subjects can quite easily lay complaints and ultimately take action. These letters that were sent out...
Just to extend a question to you on that, what would you say? I mean, as corporates, I think they very much have taken a risk-based approach to this, and have kind of tried to say, well, where do I absolutely have to be compliant? What is my risk? And therefore, practically, what do I put in place? Looking at what the companies haven't done, do you believe that they've prioritized the right things, or have they gone about it back to front? Have they almost the external facing things that everyone can see where they don't have their house in order. You know, that seems to be what might have happened. What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, so I think it's pretty well known that I've said over and over that policies are not a requirement of POPIA, and yet many organizations have spent a lot of time and money on putting policies in place. What we've seen is many organizations doing things that are superficial to actually protecting the data subjects' rights and protecting their information specifically. What is actually required is that the risk of the data subjects gets managed. It's not the risk to the entity. And so the big mistake is that organizations take a so-called risk-based approach, which ultimately, which would correctly be that no residual risk is left to the data subject. So any preparation must result in no risk to the data subject, because the responsible party is in no position to take risk on behalf of the data subject, or be prepared to pay the compensation should that be asked. And so it will be a clear demonstration again of non-compliance or lack of respect for the Constitution by not going down the path of ensuring that there's no risk left to data subjects. So
I think that's such a good perspective that you're bringing to us, that there's the business risk, but ultimately there's the data subject risk. And are we considering that? Are our clients considering that? Is your organization considering the data subject's perspective, their risk, at the same time as obviously in a corporate, you're considering your corporate risk?
Let me give you an example. There's a risk that a data subject will make a request for information. And that could be is that for whatever reason, they ask for a copy of all the emails. And they ask that that copy of those emails get transmitted to a system that they can use. Now, that person could have had a couple of months interaction. They could have had a couple of years. It could be 10, 20 years. They're then entitled to a copy of all of those emails. The organization is to collect all of those emails, make sure that there's no gaps in the emails that are provided, redact all the information that is not allowed to be provided to the data subjects, get their attorneys to check that there's nothing in those emails that would actually cause further problems, and then hand that information over to the data subject in a usable form that the data subject prefers. So that exercise is not a straightforward, simple task. Yeah. It's going to take a lot of time and effort, and they've got less than 30 days or up to 30 days to actually fulfill that request. And so this is where it is technical and complex. How will a bank who's asked to hand over all the emails or the bank transactions of their customer for the last 10 years, how will they give effect to that? As I said, if it's emails, then they have to provide all the copies of all the emails, redacting all of the information that they're entitled to redact, but making sure they don't redact anything that they're not supposed to redact, because that would then, of course, be hiding information from the data subject. So that would have to be checked by the attorneys. Is the redaction correct? Has there been over-redaction, under-redaction? So just on a simple question, do you have in-person information? And if you have copies of emails, if you've got a policy that has said that you keep emails for 5 years, well, then let's see every email for the last 5 years. If you've got a policy that says we keep emails for forever, or we use a product like Mimecast, where we haven't set the options to delete emails after 2 months or 6 months, and we've left the option to have emails available for 10 years or longer, we'll have to hand over every single email that involves that data subject. That's not a small task, and if you don't get it done in 30 days, there are going to be problems. So what it does, it pushes the organization to have to negotiate a settlement with the data subject. And any wise data subject will then get their own attorney involved to actually negotiate that settlement. Of course, they can also go to the regulator, but we mustn't overlook the fact that data subjects don't have to go to the regulator. They can take action themselves. And the most cost-effective approach for any responsible party is to deal directly with the data subject immediately and as quickly as possible. Because if that data subject goes to the regulator is going to take its time, it's going to conduct its investigations, and finally, when it produces a report, it's going to publish it in the Gazette. So everybody will get to know about that non-compliance. And of course, when the regulator starts investigating, the regulator will investigate more than the issue that the data subject has raised. They'll extend that. And just as an example, Experian last year reported a breach. That one breach actually turned out to be more than 20 different breaches, because they weren't aware of the correct procedure for breach notification, and failing to follow the correct breach notification procedure resulted in 16 more breaches.
Sure.
So this is not as straightforward and as simple as many people assume. Just to comment on small companies, I don't think small companies have a big problem. Small companies have small risks. They have few data subjects in most instances and are able to manage those risks quite easily. I'm more concerned about the large companies with millions of data subjects when they have to respond, as we saw last week or two back with QSure, which is a insurance premium processor, an operator on behalf of the insurance industry. 250 responsible parties. I don't believe any of those 250 responsible parties have yet contacted the data subjects and informed them of the breach. That's my evidence that these big financial institutions are not ready for POPIA.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Sure, you've given us some good advice and some good perspective on, what the complexities really are around this. And one of the things that always highlights to me is don't keep information for longer than you need it, because from a POPIA perspective, it does complicate your life. So if you breach information you didn't need, if you have to go find information you didn't need, those are all things that were unnecessary and added risk and extra operational expense to your process. So yeah, definitely some very good practical advice from you. Thank you, Peter. Vincent, been very quiet over there. I've seen you nodding as the conversation has been progressing, and I see we have a lot of questions on the chat. I'm going to ask you just one of my questions here, and then we're going to hop into the chat on the side. Vincent, just from your perspective, we've chatted through a whole lot of things of just generally how we've seen the market going, what's the regulator doing, readiness of the regulator, readiness of corporates, being they large, medium, small. From your side, I'm quite keen to hear, what are the things that you've seen going wrong, or what are the mistakes that you've seen happening where, maybe the wrong things have been prioritized, or opposite, where are the things that you've seen that people have done the right thing and that you can commend them and say, this is the way to go?
Right, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, so the pitfalls basically that I've seen, I think we've already touched on some of those, which is this policy-based approach, thinking that if I've got a whole bunch of policies in place that I'm then compliant, whereas POPIA is about your actions, looking at how does my business work, what are my processes, because your processes is where personal information is going to be dealt with. So look at my processes, see how personal information flows through my business, and through that realize what my risks are. So I have an application form. It comes in from a client via an email. Then the application form is printed out and left on the receptionist's desk. Once a week, somebody comes past the receptionist's desk, takes the application to the administration department, and there it sits on an admin person's desk for a few days. That's my process. So what are my risks in that process? There's a risk in the email. So what am I doing to secure my emails? There's a risk in the information lying on somebody's desk. Do I have a clean desk policy that helps me mitigate how long information lies around in the open? So if you want to take a policy-based approach, you've definitely got to tie it into at least having looked at your business. And what a lot of companies have done is they've taken the policy-based approach, but as a template. So gone to a law firm, said, I need all the policies, give me the policies, put my company logo on it, and there you go. And quite an amusing situation that occurred earlier this week. There's a Cape Town-based firm, and they used a policy from a law firm. And in the policy, it speaks about using the KZN Arbitration Council or chapter, and that they would then refer to an arbitrator, and arbitration would take place in Port Elizabeth. So clearly not customized to the Cape Town-based institution. And what does arbitration have to do with POPIA? So it was quite misplaced and erroneous. And you could see it's just a law firm that's now gone and taken a bunch of different things from different places to try and come up with something comprehensive and actually going overboard. So I think the practical way of approaching it, and that's also, I suppose, because of the way that Pétanque does business, we look at process, we are process engineers. And so that's the way we've tackled it, is to look at the company's process, and at every step you see who's interacting on the step, what personal information is there, and then start to put controls in place against those risks. And then that process map with the risks and controls shown is basically your Bible and your guide for POPIA compliance. Now, I think that's a very expensive way of doing it, because that can cost anything from a few $100,000 up to several million rand, depending on the organization size, because you're paying for consultants and human resource time of the consultants. So what I've also found helpful is there are one or two software packages that we've encountered that do help small businesses, especially. The large corporates need to go through that extensive exercise, but for a small business, it's nice. You can customize it to your business needs. You put in how you process personal information into the software. It takes a step-by-step guide for you. It is still a little bit complex, and so a little bit of guidance would be recommended, but you're looking at sub 10,000 Rand for a 1 or 2 or 3 man business trying to implement it that way. So I think businesses that have come to that realization, I can't do it on my own, I do need a bit of support, and then just finding that right solution for them. Yeah, and I think in the training that I've done, what I found most useful to help in the awareness training for staff is to say personal information is now an asset, but it's not yours. And think of it like a diamond. So I've come to you and I've given you a diamond. It's an heirloom, a family heirloom that I have. What are you going to do with it? Are you just going to leave it on your desk? How long do you think it's going to sit there for? And just start thinking of personal information in that context. It's an asset that I must take care of, but it's not mine. It belongs to someone else.
That's a very good a good way of seeing it, Vincent. It's really, you know, if you look at the cybersecurity way of doing crown jewels, you know, to me, my information is the crown jewel, and I'm giving you something of value. And my basic expectation, without any law telling you to do that, is that you're looking after it as if it is your own. And I think if we have that perspective of this is good business, this is good governance, you know, we get business value from it, and not purely, you know, compliance ticking a box. And so, yeah, I really like your way of looking at it from a process perspective and saying, do I understand where and how I am processing your diamond that you've given me? And along that journey, where can things go wrong? Where could you be at risk? Where could the business be at risk? And, you know, if you're formulating your process from there, your controls from there, your policies from there, that sounds like a very good framework to be building from. So I really like that. I like the suggestion that you've got in terms of, you know, one size doesn't fit all, but every business can do something. It is, however, like Peter Tobin was saying earlier, this is very technical and very, you know, even if you are a small business, you may need some help. You may need a solution or something that guides you along the way. Yeah, get help. Don't try and do this on your own. You certainly don't want to end up with a fine, an audit from the regulator, and definitely not a prison sentence. So absolutely want to get your house in order. And it really links into one of the first questions that I'm seeing here on the chat around the information officer. And this is really the person that takes accountability. And the question here is, ideally, who should an organization appoint as the information officer? And they specifically wanting to know around skill set. And then the second part of the question is, do they have to be registered with a regulator? So Peter Tobin, you had some very clear thoughts on the regulator earlier, and not necessarily being ready. And I checked again this morning, and the portal to register is still not up and running. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the two sides to that question.
Well, of course, Lynn, I think many of us are aware that by default, PIA told us who the information officer is. The POPIA Act has piggybacked on PIA. The guidance note, which was issued on the 1st of April, which came from the regulator, and the online registration system has now been thrown up in the air somewhat because there were lots of complaints. The regulator, to their credit, has run a series of webinars over the last couple of months, and a stream of questions came in about, well, how is this going to work in practice? my organization needs to be able to appoint people who can do the work. And I have a group situation in my company, group of companies, but the registration process was tied to the use of an ID number, suggesting once you're registered in the system once, you couldn't take on any other roles. Now, the regulator has since backpedaled on that and said, don't worry, we'll be removing that restriction. But there are still lots of potentially confusing issues. So let's just get the facts straight here. By default, the information officer is determined by the law, but the organization has the opportunity to appoint what rather confusingly is still called an information officer, not an alternate information officer or some other title. The documentation suggests that the default information officer, typically carrying the title CEO in a commercial organization, can appoint someone else to act in the information officer role. Now, that individual, there's no prerequisite qualification set. They don't have to have a particular legal background or whatever. What is clear is they're expected to hold equivalent senior executive responsibilities so that they have clout in the organization. There was a requirement that they have to be an employee of the organization, but that may even be up for discussion based on some of the statements that have been made by the regulator.
Yeah, I think
Now,
Peter, I asked the question earlier, what were some of the aha moments that our corporates have had? But at the same time, I think the regulator has had some aha moments around the practicality of what they've put forward. And that's kind of what you're highlighting now is, they put certain things forward, or the form or the system, only had certain restrictions. And it's really back to the drawing board for them in a way to go and make their processes and regulations more practical and applicable to a business operation.
Look, one of the things you asked, Lynn, was, do I have to register with the regulator? The answer is yes. When the guidance note came out on the 1st of April, which was an interesting date to choose, there was the option to submit via email. I tried that option ahead of the availability of the online system from May and was told, please don't send in by email, wait for the online system. Some others may have had that similar experience. One of my enthusiastic customers, one of my enthusiastic customers actually printed out the form and physically walked it to the offices in Braamfontein. And there was a rather surprised reception at the office. And the answer was from the regulator, please don't do that either. So there are system challenges, that's true. What we've seen now is a removal of any suggestion of any penalty. There's no end date currently for the registration of the information officer. And of course, that goes with the deputy information officer. I think one of the key things about the role of the information officer is that it is the only area in the legislation and regulations where there is a suggestion that there should be training. In the POPIA Act, we hear about creating awareness. But if you read the guidance note, it says the information officer and deputy information officer should be provided with training. And to my astonishment, when I read the mandate of the regulator in their own documentation, where it talks about providing training, in this area, they say we're not going to be providing training. They are doing general awareness training at various taxi ranks and public markets and so on around the country, which is laudable. It's really good. They're getting out to meet the public. But I think there needs to be some clarity as to what the regulator's role is. They've got an executive for each of the two pieces of legislation. Those executives need to be much more forthcoming in terms of what are we doing to enable people to fulfill those roles.
Lynn, can I comment on this, please?
Please go ahead, Peter.
So just to clarify, the POPIA Act only talks about an information officer in the context of public sector. The POPIA Act talks about the head of the body in the private sector. The head of the body is the responsible party, the person who ultimately is responsible for the processing. So the POPIA Act does not appoint, or by default, have an information officer appointed in the private sector. An information officer is appointed through the POPIA Act, and it's the responsible party who must register the information officer, because the information officer's role is to assist the responsible party. one of the duties of the information officer is to encourage compliance. So the responsible party would want to choose an information officer capable of providing good advice and assisting the organization fulfill its obligations.
Yeah.
The other duty that the information officer has is to assist data subjects, lodge their requests, make their complaints, and negotiate their settlements. So the information officer needs to be an independent role and needs to be in a position which the data subjects will trust that information officer. Now, unfortunately, the regulator did have some missteps in those guidelines, especially the draft guideline. And I've been in regular contact with the regulator over this particular topic and others. And one of the things is that that draft guideline was prepared by the part of the regulator, or at least an individual in the regulator, who took a POPIA perspective and not a POPIA perspective.
Okay.
They also took a public sector perspective and ignored the private sector requirements. And so with regard to the decision-making responsibilities in a private sector and the role of a CEO. And so there are some problems, and having been part of the process of developing the Act, we can see that a mistake was made. And if I recall correctly, we did try and correct it, but it wasn't in the final legislation, in that it does appear that the POPIA Act actually refers to the head of the private body as the information officer, or whoever the head of the private body delegates that responsibility to. So it's not a default position. It is either the head of the private body or anybody who that person actually decides to appoint. It can be either a natural person or it can be a juristic person. In terms of the Act, the definition of person is both natural and juristic. So either of those for private sector can be an information officer. Doesn't have to be an employee. That was a mistake again, but probably looking at the interest of public sector entities to make sure that they appoint somebody internally. But for many organizations, they don't have staff with the skills and the time and resources available to assist data subjects. If a data subject's got a complaint to make, they're going to expect the information officer to assist them. And if the information officer doesn't have the skill, the time or the resources, then the data subject is going to complain to the regulator that that information officer is incompetent. So we always say, select your information officer carefully, because there could be consequences to the responsible party for failing to appoint the right person to assist data subjects.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for adding further context to that and a bit of the, the legal drafting side of it. I think that is good for us to also understand a bit of the history. I think, as you've mentioned at the moment, we can't formally register. What I would encourage the audience is don't let that stop you from doing that internally. Make sure that you understand the roles, make sure that you have accountability for POPI identified in your organization, that it is clear within your business who's doing what, who's accountable, who the deputies are. Clarify that. Don't let this hold you back if you haven't done it yet. So that when the portals open, you just have to register. The reason being, you still want to ensure you have accountability and that you are ensuring compliance, you're ensuring awareness, that your procedures and your processes are working. So I would just encourage you to do that. We don't have too much time left, so I'm going to ask the panel. I'd like to get through as many questions as possible. So if we can try and keep our answers a bit shorter so that we can get through a bunch of them, that would be great. The next one, Vincent, I'd love for you to answer for us, because I can get links into what you were saying earlier. This question is, what are the key determinants to consider when deciding whether to get a consultant in for POPIA compliance instead of doing it yourself? And I know you already gave a little bit of an answer to that. Maybe if you could just extend on that for the delegate.
Yeah, so I think that if you've got someone with a deep understanding of the Act, because as you can hear from what both Peters have said, it is a very technical piece of legislation. It's not something a layman, man on the street can actually implement in an organization. It should have been, in my opinion, but it isn't. It is quite technical. So you need to have someone with a deep understanding of the Act and also of your business. So if you have that skill set in-house, someone that understands how information flows through your business and a deep understanding of the Act and a legal background, I'd say you can try and tackle it yourself. If you are a large corporate with an in-house compliance department, you're probably okay, although you might not have the capacity, and then you'd want to look at consultants. Medium-sized companies not going to have the capacity or the skill set. I'd say medium-sized should probably use consultants. And then your small companies, you've got to find some sort of a solution. As I've said, I think there's one or two software packages. There aren't many, and there's a lot of ones that you should not go for. So maybe what you should do is book an hour with a consultant, get that advice, and then go and try to do it yourself, and maybe just to have a few 1-hour sessions with a consultant. So you minimize the spend on the consultant and you maximize on the value you get out of them. But it's going to be difficult for a small company to do it on their own.
Very good, Vincent. Yeah, I've also seen 1 or 2 smaller organizations just get that 1 or 2 hours of advice. Just, you know, am I on the right track? This is what I'm doing. Okay, in a month's time, just check in again. And, you know, that is affordable, and you know that you are, you know, protecting your business and your data subject. So very, very, yeah, very good and practical advice there. Candice, from your side, linking into the question we had about the information officer, the question here is many POPIA projects are driven from the legal department's perspective. What have you seen, and, you know, is there a recommended right place to have your POPIA efforts driven from?
Thanks, Lynn. So I don't think there's a right or wrong place. I think there's a lot that you have to take into consideration. I think exactly what Vincent said in terms of, you know, what experience do you have? Do you understand that organization and which aspect? I think if you only drive it purely from one perspective, so if you're only driving it from the compliance and the legal, I think you may lose the business people. And I think that's what you've got to take into consideration. So yes, while a lot of the legal, because it is legislation, they've said, okay, legal compliance, you guys understand this, so you help us drive it. It's necessarily not wrong. I think they just have to consider all the different aspects, especially when it comes to security safeguards, you know, which is largely driven by your information security and your IT departments, to make sure that, you know, they really become that supporter and that enabler, because there's a lot of the controls that need to be put in place that, you know, is going to need them to also get on board. So while it may be driven from one area, whether it be legal, whether it be risk, whether it be compliance, even sometimes in IT, because some people have just felt that that's the best position, it's still about taking that step back and saying, yes, I may be leading this, or I may be leading this journey, or, you know, this privacy compliance program, but let me make sure that I have all areas of the business involved, because that's what you need. That's, you know, you can't take a one-sided approach to this. So yes, while it may be driven from one area, that area needs to make sure that they've got everybody in place and they've got all the people and all roles within the organization. Because I think it's, you know, that slip that you may think, oh, okay, there's no data subjects in that area, or this area is not really involved, or they're not going to touch on much, is the one area that you don't want to find yourself in. So I really don't think there's a right or wrong. I think we've seen it placed in multiple different roles, largely in the legal, compliance, risk, and IT spaces. But I think it's about making sure that even though it's driven from that, have that multifaceted team. Make sure that you have like some champions, some core team members around the room that, you know, can really guide you, so that you're not only thinking of it in one aspect, whether sometimes you think of it only from IT and you think everything's electronic and you forget about hard copy information, or you take it only from legal and you don't take the practical side of things. So that for me is, yes, legal can
Oh, okay. Now that the POPIA Act is in effect, what should I do as an individual? So this is very much data subject. I'm an individual and I'm still receiving telemarketing calls. Who would like to take a stab at